Hey everyone, and welcome back to NDC. Today we're going to be breaking down the top Swift and SwiftUI interview questions, the ones that come up in real developer interviews, from junior positions all the way to senior mobile roles. I'm not just going to be giving you the answers, I'm going to be giving you the why behind the answer and the little phrasing tricks that might help you stand out as a prepared, confident candidate. And in all the answers, I'll also provide a code snippet so you get a little bit more coding context. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on into question number 1. The first question, what are optionals in Swift? This question appears in almost every Swift interview, and the strongest answers don't just define optionals, they explain why they matter. A great answer sounds like this. Optionals in Swift are types that can either hold a value or be nil. They force you to handle the absence of data at compile time, which avoids a huge class of runtime crashes. I unwrap optionals using if-let, as well as guard-let, optional chaining, and nil coalescing, depending on the context. This answer is short, technical, and confident. You've shown the interviewer that you know both the theory and the practical tools. Question 2. What is the difference between classes and structs in Swift? This one measures whether you understand value semantics versus reference semantics. Here's how I'd answer it. Structs are value types. Every copy is independent, which eliminates unintended side effects and makes them safer for concurrency. Classes are reference types. You can have multiple references pointing to the same instance, which enables identity and inheritance, but also introduces ARC considerations. You may want to also include some examples, whether that's car manufacturers or car makes and models. That's a pretty common one. Otherwise, you would generally end with, I prefer structs unless I explicitly need reference semantics, shared state, or inheritance. That last little line shows maturity as an engineer. Question number 3, what are closures in Swift and how are they used? Your answer should frame closures as both language features and a practical tool. I would say something like, closures are self-contained blocks of functionality that you can store, pass around, and execute. They capture values from their surrounding scope, which makes them ideal for any callbacks, async work, as well as functional transformations, so things like map, filter, and reduce. If you want some bonus points, you can mention in SwiftUI, closures are everywhere. Buttons, actions, animations, transitions. You can even use weak self to avoid retain cycles when needed. So this way in your answer, you've covered syntax, usage, as well as a little bit of memory management. Question number 4, how do protocols and delegations work in Swift? This is actually your chance to show that you understand modern architectural patterns. An example answer would be that a protocol defines a contract, methods or properties conforming type must implement. A delegation uses a protocol to let one object hand off work to another. It keeps objects loosely coupled and focused on a single responsibility. The key details that an interviewer wants here is that the delegate is usually a weak reference to prevent any retain cycles. Question number 5, how does automatic reference counting, or ARC, work in Swift, and how can you avoid memory leaks? This one checks that you understand Swift's memory model. You can answer something like, ARC automatically manages memory by keeping a reference count on class instances. When the strong reference count hits 0, the instance is deallocated. Memory leaks occur when two objects hold a strong reference to each other. The fix is marking one side as weak or unowned, or even using the weak self inside any closures. This way you can show theory, cause, and solution. Next, we're going to focus on SwiftUI interview questions. This is a pretty common one. For question number 6, what is SwiftUI and how is it different from UIKit? Interviewers want to hear that you actually understand the paradigm shift. We know that UIKit is imperative and SwiftUI is declarative, so I would answer it something like, UIKit is imperative. You tell the UI what to do step by step, whereas SwiftUI is declarative. You describe what the UI should look like for a given state, and the framework updates everything automatically. Then, to round it out, especially if you're in a SwiftUI interview, you can say something like SwiftUI is reactive, state drives the UI. This way you have a nice, clean, confident, and accurate answer. For question number 7, how do you manage state in Swift? So this can be state, binding, observed object, maybe even environment object. This one can separate beginners from people who have actually built apps. A lot of people just start off with that state and never really explore binding, state object, observed, etc. A perfect answer to this question is SwiftUI uses property wrappers to manage state. I would then talk about these 5 states. The first one, at state, this is a local view-owned state. For binding, this is a two-way connection to a parent state. For binding, you might also want to include how it's used in UI elements with the $sign state object. This creates and owns a reference type model. For the observed object, this observes a model created elsewhere, and environment object, this is a shared global state injected from above. I would also include something like SwiftUI follows a single source of truth pattern. Data updates the UI, not the other way around, just to reinforce your knowledge. For question number 8, how does navigation work in SwiftUI? For this, you typically want to reference the most modern APIs. An answer might look like SwiftUI uses navigation stack and navigation link for push-based navigation. For modules, we may use sheet, full screen cover, or even popover, usually controlled by a Boolean state being true or false. Navigation itself is declarative. We describe the destination and the conditions, and SwiftUI handles those transitions. You can get a little bit more in depth or even provide examples. However, that should cover the basis of what an interviewer needs to hear. Question number 9, what is a list in SwiftUI? Your answer should probably frame it in terms of usage as well as performance. Although I don't have it on the code example here, definitely mention lazy VStack. So a way to answer this question is a list renders a scrolling table of rows. It works really well with for each, as well as any identifiable models and tags. It actually automatically handles cell reuse for performance, similar to the UI table view, but a lot simpler. You may want to give an example of when you've used lists. So you can say like, I often use lists for structured data, often with deletion, selection, and accessibility. But if I need to, I'll switch to scroll view in a lazy VStack when I need more custom layouts. This shows real world understanding and a little bit more context behind the scenes. Question number 10, how would you build a reusable SwiftUI component? This one is super easy to ace. I would answer something like, I would create a UI pattern into its own view struct and expose properties needed for customization. For styles, I would use view modifiers. For any flexible child content, I would actually use the view builder. This way we can keep the code clean, testable, reusable, and easy to preview. Don't overthink this one. It should be pretty simple, just like creating your own custom structs. And that covers most of the general SwiftUI questions. We're going to move on to more like behavioral questions in terms of general coding interviews. For question 11, describe a challenging bug that you've solved. This is your opportunity to tell a real debugging story. And I'm sure everybody here is going to have their own story because, you know, bugs, am I right? But I would kind of structure a story like, in a SwiftUI project, a view wasn't refreshing when I appended items to a list. After I did some debugging, you may also want to reference some tools that you've used, even if it's the console, if you've used print statements, even tracking variables. And then, you know, you can realize, oh, hey, here's a solution. Maybe an array wasn't marked with state or published, so SwiftUI wasn't tracking the changes. You can talk about your success. You know, once I fixed the property wrapper, the UI updated immediately. If you want to follow up or even include one about memory leaks, perhaps the time that you've used the instrument's memory graph debugger, etc., you can use this as an opportunity to talk about any tools that you've used, especially the debugging tools or even the view hierarchy to debug any kind of janky views there. Another thing you might want to talk about is actually making an app that's usable on iPhone and scale properly into iPad. There's usually a little bit of jank there sometimes. SwiftUI is pretty good about it, but maybe you've implemented Geometry Reader to make sure it scales properly. I can think of 200 answers personally to that question. So it should be a pretty personal one, but you can learn from those examples. Question 12, how do you keep your Swift and SwiftUI skills up to date? Again, a pretty personal question. This one, they're just asking about your passion. I would 100,000% mention any projects that you're currently working on as a way of building your experience. If there's any small side projects, if you're experimenting with APIs, packages, etc. A big thing to also mention is watching and keeping in touch with WWDC every single year. If you engage in like Stack Overflow, iOS engineering blogs, if you're part of dev communities, watching YouTube videos, contributing to open source, right? They really just want to know that you're interested and passionate in development. Your answer should kind of show some curiosity and ownership over your career. So again, these last two ones are kind of hard to provide sample answers for. It's all about your own personal experience there. So those are the top Swift and SwiftUI interview questions you need to know in 2025. I'm also going to put a link to a Hacking with Swift article. Here you can actually find over 150 iOS interview questions. Might be a little bit overkill to go through all of them, but maybe in each of one of these sections, If there's a question that really stands out to you, you might just want to study it or practice your own answer. So this is a great resource if you kind of want to look up some of the questions, even the miscellaneous ones, like how do you stay up to date with changes in Swift, right? Or even how has Swift changed? The most important thing when answering interview questions is to be honest. If you do have examples that you can speak to, definitely include those. Let me know in the comments if you want a part 2 with more detailed or advanced questions, maybe about architecture, things like MVVM, async await patterns, or maybe we can even whiteboard through a leet code question, just so we can talk about the thought process there in case you do have to do a live coding question. So if you're preparing for your first job, aiming for a senior role, mastering these concepts makes you stand out from every other candidate. And as always, dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one.